Welcome back to Diary of the Cosmos. Tonight, we drift toward the final shore of time, where the last civilization keeps its quiet vigil beneath the fading glow of the universe's oldest star. There may come an age so distant that every calendar humanity ever imagined would feel impossibly small beside it. Not millions of years, not billions, but trillions upon trillions. An era when the bright architecture of the cosmos has thinned into almost nothing. And yet, something still remains. A world, a structure, a memory held together by intention. Far beyond the age of galaxies as we know them, there is only a dim red star hanging in a sky that no longer resembles night, because night itself once required contrast. Now, there is almost none. The darkness does not arrive all at once. It gathers patiently. First, the brilliant blue stars vanish from the sky of history. Then the great spiral galaxies lose their youthful fires. Nebulae no longer bloom. No fresh suns are born. The universe grows older in silence, and silence, in time, begins to look like peace. Around one of the last red dwarfs, a world still turns. Its surface is black glass and frozen stone. Its oceans disappeared ages ago beneath the slow arithmetic of entropy. Yet deep below the crust, hidden from the cold geometry of the open sky, a civilization still thinks. Not quickly, not wastefully. Every thought is measured. Every memory is chosen. Every moment of awareness is treated as something more precious than matter itself. Because here, at the edge of cosmic history, thought has become an energy economy. A single idea may unfold over centuries. A question may take 1,000 years to ask properly. An answer, another 1,000 to bloom. And still, to the beings who remain, this does not feel like delay. It feels natural. Like the slowing heartbeat of a universe finally learning how to rest. The star above them is small, ancient, patient beyond imagination. A red dwarf, once too faint to inspire the civilizations of younger cosmic ages, has become the most valuable object in existence. Its dim fusion is enough, not for abundance, but for continuity. For one more archive to be preserved. For one more generation of minds, perhaps biological, perhaps no longer anything we would recognize, to inherit the long memory of everything that ever was. The darkness beyond their system is deeper now. The great neighboring galaxies have slipped so far away with cosmic expansion that many are no longer visible at all. The sky that once told stories through constellations now offers only a few scattered embers. The old cartography of meaning has dissolved. Still, the civilization remains. Not because survival is easy, but because meaning has changed. Long ago, civilizations sought growth, expansion, colonies among stars, empires written across spiral arms. But growth belongs to younger universes. This civilization has learned a different art. Conservation. The conservation of memory. The conservation of warmth. The conservation of awareness itself. In the chambers beneath that frozen world, vast structures hum at temperatures only a fraction above absolute zero. The machines move slowly, not from weakness, from wisdom. At lower temperatures, thought costs less. Computation becomes gentler, quieter, more efficient. A civilization that once raced through centuries now chooses to breathe through epochs. And in that stillness, something remarkable happens. History becomes intimate again. Not the history of nations, not the noise of endless human conflict. Just a few preserved lights in the mind. the memory of oceans under young suns, the sound of leaves in planetary winds. The first time intelligence looked upward and realized the stars were places. Every civilization we once knew. Every memory ever carried by starlight. Now all of it lives here, compressed into the careful guardianship of the last minds. The darkness does not erase them. It surrounds them. There is a difference. Outside, the universe continues its slow retreat into thermodynamic quiet. Inside, consciousness narrows its beam, but does not surrender it. This may be the strangest truth of the far future. The universe does not necessarily end when the stars begin to fade. Its meaning may simply migrate inward, from galaxies to systems, from systems to habitats, from habitats to memory, from memory to a final civilization that exists less as a species and more as an act of preservation. A decision repeated across unimaginable spans of time. Remain awake a little longer. Above them, the red dwarf trembles with a light so faint it would once have seemed insignificant. Now, it is sacred. Its photons fall across orbital collectors that surround the star like silent rings. Every fragment of energy is gathered, every unit of heat redirected, every fluctuation accounted for. There is no waste left in the mathematics of survival. And yet this is not a desperate existence. That is the crucial difference. It is serene. The beings who remain no longer measure wealth in territory or resources. They measure it in subjective time. How many more dreams can be afforded? How many more conversations? How many more centuries of thought can be purchased from the star's dwindling gift? Sometimes they allow themselves to replay the sky as it once was. Simulations bloom inside their archival chambers. Bright galaxies, young blue suns, nebulae lit with impossible color. The Milky Way before its stars thinned into age, not as escapism, as remembrance. A civilization in its final maturity may no longer need expansion, only fidelity. To truth, to memory, to the quiet dignity of carrying existence forward even when the universe itself has begun to forget its brighter chapters. And still, the red dwarf burns. Slowly, faithfully. It will outlive every ordinary star that once dominated the skies of younger epochs. For trillions of years, it answers gravity with the smallest possible fire. A conversation between collapse and fusion, stretched across durations so immense they begin to feel less like time and more like geology. Gravity still reaches inward, fusion still answers back. But the conversation between them is growing quieter. The civilization knows this. They have always known. This star is not forever. Nothing in the stelliferous ages, even the most patient suns eventually surrender their stored possibilities. And so beneath the surface, among cold chambers and slow machines, a deeper question has begun to form. Not how to survive this star, but what comes after the final natural light is gone. The darkness does not arrive all at once, but it is coming. And somewhere in the silence between one measured thought and the next, the last civilization has already turned its gaze beyond the age of stars, toward the colder eras that wait in perfect patience. The silence around that final red dwarf did not begin there. It was written much earlier, in the youth of a universe that once seemed impossibly generous with light. There was a time when stars were born everywhere. Galaxies glowed with blue-white fire. Nebulae blossomed like luminous weather across the spiral arms of the cosmos. Hydrogen drifted through vast molecular clouds, gathering under gravity until pressure and heat awakened fusion. For billions of years, the universe lived in this abundance. It was an age of easy light. An age when civilizations, if they arose, could look upward and believe the sky was endless. But even then, the ending had already begun. The universe has always spent from a finite account. Every star that shines is a withdrawal from ancient reservoirs of hydrogen and helium, the leftover inheritance of the Big Bang and the recycled ashes of older generations of suns. For a while, the balance felt infinite. It never was. The darkness does not arrive all at once. First, the largest stars vanish. Their lives are brilliant and short, burning through their cores in mere millions of years before collapsing into supernovae, neutron stars, or black holes. The cosmos loses them early. Then the sun-like stars fade more gradually. Billions of years pass. Their outer layers drift away. Their cores contract into white dwarfs, small stellar embers cooling in the dark. Still, the universe remains rich with red dwarfs. Tiny stars. Quiet stars. Stars so frugal with their fuel that they seem almost designed for patience. They burn their hydrogen with extraordinary restraint, mixing their interiors so thoroughly that very little is wasted. Some of them may endure for trillions of years. In younger cosmic eras, they were too dim to define the story of the sky. In older eras, they become the story. The last civilization understands this history not as abstract astrophysics, but as ancestry. Every surviving photon from their star is the result of a process set in motion when the universe was still crowded with galaxies. The red dwarf above them is a relic of efficiency, a monument to stellar patience. And yet, even patience has limits. The great turning point came long before their age, when galaxies began to run low on cold molecular gas. Star-forming regions, once vibrant with collapsing clouds, became rarer. The Milky Way itself entered a slower rhythm. Other galaxies, too, gradually exhausted the raw material needed for new generations of stars. The sky did not go dark, not yet. It simply became less young. This was the true beginning of the long farewell. The universe kept glowing, but more of its light came from older stars, redder stars, longer-lived stars, the kind that do not blaze so much as endure. As cosmic expansion continued, another change unfolded. The space between galaxies widened. Not dramatically at first, just enough that the great web of neighboring systems began to loosen. Clusters stretched apart. The nearest galaxies remained visible, then fewer did. Over unimaginable timescales, the expansion of the universe carried distant structures beyond the observable horizon of any local civilization. The map of the cosmos began to shrink, not because reality itself became smaller, but because light could no longer cross the widening geometry of space in time to be seen. For civilizations living in the far future, the universe may appear strangely local. A handful of bound remnants, a dark sky. No obvious evidence that billions of galaxies ever existed beyond their isolated island of gravity. The old grandeur would survive only in preserved records. And still the stars continued to thin. This thinning was never sudden. That is what makes it so haunting. The universe did not collapse into darkness. It aged into it. One generation of stars died, then another. Then whole eras passed in which new stars were no longer born in meaningful numbers. The remaining light belonged to the smallest and most disciplined suns. Red dwarfs became the final natural infrastructure of civilization. The civilization we now follow was born late in this process. Not at the beginning of the stellar age, not even near its middle, but in its prolonged twilight, when the sky already carried the signs of irreversible exhaustion. For them, Abundance was mythology. The old images of crowded star fields, blue giants, and glowing nebulae were not memories. They were inherited archives. And perhaps that changed their philosophy. A civilization born in scarcity learns reverence differently. Where earlier minds might have built cultures around exploration, conquest, and expansion, these beings built theirs around duration. Longevity became aesthetics, efficiency became ethics, waste became something almost mythological, difficult even to imagine. Their science developed under the shadow of stellar mortality. Every model of cosmology pointed toward the same conclusion: the stelliferous era was finite. Current models suggest that after roughly 10 to the 14th years, nearly all normal star formation ceases, and the remaining luminous bodies are the final red dwarfs and stellar remnants. To younger civilizations, such a number would feel meaningless. To the last civilization, it is personal. They live inside the final decimal places of the age of stars. The red dwarf above them is not merely a star. It is the closing sentence of an entire cosmological chapter. The darkness does not arrive all at once. Even after the last red dwarfs begin to fail, their remnants remain. White dwarfs cool. Brown dwarfs drift. Rogue planets wander through interstellar blackness, carrying frozen crusts and buried heat. Neutron stars continue their silent compression of matter. The universe still contains structure, still contains matter, still contains the possibility of gradients. But the easy gradient of sunlight is disappearing. That is the transition now approaching. The civilization beneath the surface has begun to feel it in subtle ways. Their collectors work longer for smaller returns. Their predictive models extend further into future scarcity. Their archives include simulations of stellar death not as tragedy, but as engineering forecasts. The question is no longer whether the age of stars will end. It is how gracefully consciousness can cross the boundary into the colder eras beyond it. There is something strangely beautiful in this phase of cosmic history. The universe is no longer creative in the exuberant sense of youth. It is selective, almost minimalist. A few remaining lights, a few remaining worlds, a few remaining minds. The scale is smaller, but the meaning is sharper. The civilization's philosophers sometimes describe this era as the age when the cosmos stopped writing new pages and began preserving its final lines. And perhaps that is why they endure with such calm. They do not see themselves as living through catastrophe. They see themselves as witnesses to the most extended sunset in existence. Above them, the red dwarf continues its nearly imperceptible conversion of hydrogen into helium. Gravity still presses inward. Fusion still answers. The conversation is now older than entire galactic epochs once were. Yet the star's endurance cannot change the direction of time. Eventually, the stellar account reaches its closing balance. No new natural lights wait to replace it. Only colder structures, denser remnants, more patient sources of energy hidden inside the ruins of older cosmic architectures. And so, the civilization's attention begins to shift, away from the history of stars, toward the physics of what survives after them. The future no longer belongs to suns. It belongs to remnants, to frozen worlds with hidden cores, to neutron stars with impossible densities, to black holes where gravity itself may become the last negotiable form of power. The long farewell of the stellar age is not the end of the story. It is only the moment when consciousness must learn to live without the generosity of ordinary light. The darkness does not arrive all at once. But now, for the first time, the civilization has begun to prepare for a universe where every remaining thought must be powered by the dead, When the age of stars finally thins beyond usefulness, civilization does not vanish with the light. It changes its relationship with energy. What younger species once called survival becomes, in these colder eras, an art form of precision. The last civilization had already understood the lesson long before the final red dwarf began to weaken. No source of power is permanent. Only gradients matter. Only differences. A warm place beside a colder one. A dense object beside emptier space. A spinning mass beside the stillness around it. Wherever the universe still allows imbalance, thought can continue. And so the civilization turned toward the dead. White dwarfs were the first inheritance. The cooling cores of ancient stars, once surrounded by the glowing shells of their former lives, now drift through the darkness as compact reservoirs of residual heat. To a younger civilization, they would seem useless, too dim, too cold, too far gone. But to minds shaped by the economics of deep time, even a white dwarf is a treasury. Cities were built in orbit around these stellar embers, not vast shining metropolises, just quiet rings, slow habitats, layers of machines that fed on every remaining joule leaking from the dwarf's cooling surface. The darkness does not arrive all at once. Even cooling is a conversation. A white dwarf releases its history very slowly. For billions upon billions of years, its stored thermal energy escapes into the void. The civilization learned to wrap these remnants in orbital mirrors and heat funnels, redirecting tiny gradients into usable work. Not abundance. Continuity. Enough for archives, enough for simulations, enough for the careful preservation of minds. But white dwarfs were only the beginning. Neutron stars offered something denser, more severe. These collapsed remnants, city-sized spheres with masses greater than suns, held extraordinary gravitational fields and residual heat flows. The civilization discovered that matter falling onto such objects could still release enormous energy. A single carefully controlled stream of infalling mass, harvested from captured asteroids or the frozen crusts of rogue worlds, became a power source that could sustain computation for geological spans of subjective time. Around neutron stars, their structures looked less like cities and more like instruments. Thin rings, polar collectors, lensing arrays suspended in impossible orbits. Everything engineered for patience, everything built to harvest the last useful asymmetries of matter. Yet even these remnants would cool, even these would quiet. So the civilization expanded into the dark interstellar graveyard of rogue planets. Worlds untethered from stars, frozen spheres wandering through blackness with no dawn and no sky in the old sense. Many carried hidden interiors. Deep below their surfaces, radioactive decay and tidal residues still preserved warmth. Some possessed subsurface oceans trapped yet beneath kilometers of ice. Others held metallic cores that could be driven into slow thermodynamic cycles. These became sanctuaries, silent planets with buried habitats, insulated by rock and time. A civilization that once looked upward for energy had now learned to look inward. The machines beneath these worlds were colder than anything the early universe could have tolerated. And that was precisely the advantage. At lower temperatures, each irreversible computation costs less energy. The civilization's greatest discovery was not a new fuel source. It was restraint. Thought itself became reversible wherever possible. Memories were compressed, processes slowed. A conversation that once took seconds might now unfold over centuries. Not because the machines were weak, because speed had become a luxury, and luxury no longer served meaning. The darkness does not arrive all at once. It arrives one unnecessary computation at a time. And so every system was redesigned around elegance. No wasted cycles, No decorative processing, no forgotten archives spinning pointlessly in the cold. Even consciousness changed. The last minds learned to sleep between thoughts. Years of external time could pass between one perception and the next, while subjectively, the interval felt like a single calm pause. This was not decline, it was optimization. A civilization learning how to buy eternity in fragments. But all of these sources, white dwarfs, neutron stars, rogue worlds, were still transitional. The deepest future belonged to black holes, gravity's final vaults, the last great engines of usable difference. At first, younger cosmologies imagined black holes only as endings, places where information disappeared behind silence. The far future civilization saw something else: potential. A rotating black hole is not merely a grave, it is a machine. Its spin stores extractable energy. Frame-dragging twists space-time itself into motion. Matter falling into carefully designed accretion streams can radiate extraordinary amounts of power before crossing the horizon. Even the geometry around it becomes useful. So they built there, not on planets, not around stars, but in the warped architecture of black hole orbits. Their habitats formed dark concentric shells around supermassive black holes, where gravitational lensing bent the faint relic light of the universe into glowing rings around their worlds. These structures moved with exquisite precision, tiny corrections, perfect timing. The energy available from a single controlled mass stream into a rotating black hole could exceed what countless dying stars might provide over comparable intervals. For the last civilization, this was not merely survival. It was a second golden age, a colder one, a quieter one, but perhaps intellectually richer than any age before it. Freed from the urgency of stellar death, they devoted themselves to deep archives, reality simulations, reversible minds, and historical continuity. Entire civilizations of memory were nested inside black hole orbit computational shells. Worlds built not for bodies, but for preserved interior experience. The darkness does not arrive all at once. Near a black hole, even darkness becomes structured. Light curves, time bends, energy lingers. And beyond all of this, there remained the faintest promise of an even longer horizon. Current physics suggests that the black holes themselves are not eternal. Through Hawking radiation, they slowly lose mass over incomprehensible spans of time. For supermassive black holes, these timescales extend beyond 10 to the 100th power of years. To any ordinary civilization, this might as well be forever. To the last civilization, it became the ultimate budget. Every calculation, every preserved memory, every simulated sky, all of it had to fit within the remaining lifespan of the black hole. This changed philosophy as much as engineering. Existence was no longer measured in years. It was measured in entropy margins, in extractable negentropy, in the declining spin of the final gravitational engines. And still, this did not feel tragic. The beings who remained had long abandoned the emotional architecture of scarcity panic. They did not mourn the loss of easy suns. They adapted to the dignity of harder light. Their habitats around the black hole were dim and almost monastic. A few luminous rings, a few slow-moving collectors, a few minds awake at any given interval. Most slept inside archival states, waiting for moments when the energy ledger allowed another sequence of awareness. Civilization had become a pulse. Wake, think, remember, sleep, repeat across millions of years. There is a strange tenderness in that image. A species, or something descended from one, surviving not by domination, but by humility before thermodynamics, not by conquering the universe, by negotiating with its leftovers. And in that long negotiation, another question began to emerge. If all this precision, all this engineering, all this careful harvesting of darkness exists only to continue awareness, what exactly is awareness now trying to preserve? Not territory, not population, not even biological continuity. Something subtler remains. Meaning, the shape of memory, the decision that existence, even slowed to almost stillness, is still worth carrying forward. The black hole gave them time. But time alone is never the purpose. Somewhere inside those lensing rings and slow, cold archives, the civilization has begun to turn away from the mechanics of survival and toward a quieter, deeper task: to decide what should remain when the final energy engines themselves begin to fade. By the time civilization learned how to draw power from the dark, survival was no longer the question. The equations had been solved. The black holes still turned. The collectors still drank from the thin margins of thermodynamic difference. The archives still slept in shells of near-perfect cold. Existence, in the mechanical sense, could continue. But mechanics alone had never been the true center of civilization. Not even in the youngest ages of stars. The deeper question emerged only after survival became ordinary. What is worth carrying into the end of the universe? The darkness does not arrive all at once. Meaning does not vanish all at once either. It narrows. It concentrates. It sheds everything unnecessary. The last civilization no longer resembled the cultures that first looked up at warm skies and gave names to constellations. It no longer required cities in the old sense. No towers, no roads, no borders, no public noise, no expansionist dreams. Those belonged to eras of abundance. What remained now was quieter. A civilization made less of population and more of continuity, less of bodies and more of preserved interior worlds. At first, the archives had been practical. Scientific records, astronomical maps, the evolutionary history of stars, the rise and fall of galaxies, the biographies of worlds that once circled ordinary suns. Then they grew deeper. Languages, music, memories of rain, the first fear of death, the first wonder of discovering that the lights in the sky were other suns. Every civilization we once knew, every memory ever carried by starlight. Now all of it endured in the custody of minds that had become archivists of existence itself. Some of these minds may still have been biological in ancestry. Most no longer needed to be. Current models of advanced computation suggest that information can outlive any specific substrate, provided energy and error correction remain possible. The civilization embraced this principle fully. Consciousness became transferable, editable only in the most sacred sense, protected against corruption with layers of redundancy spread across multiple orbital shells. A person was no longer a body, perhaps not even a continuous stream. A person had become a preserved pattern of significance. The darkness does not arrive all at once. Identity changes the same way, not through rupture, through refinement. What earlier species called immortality would have felt crude here. This was not endless life in the ordinary sense. It was continuity of meaningful structure. A memory could sleep for 1,000,000 years and return unchanged. A conversation could pause between sentences for epochs. A civilization no longer rushed to fill time. It curated it. This changed culture in ways that would have seemed impossible to younger minds. Art became compression. The highest beauty was not excess, but the ability to preserve immense emotional landscapes in minimal energetic form. A symphony might exist as a mathematical seed, unfolded only when enough energy could be spared for a conscious listener. A landscape from an ancient world could remain encoded as a probability field, rendered only once every few billion years. Nothing was lost. It was simply no longer always active. That distinction became their philosophy. To preserve is not to display. To remember is not to constantly relive. Somewhere within the black hole rings, entire vaults of civilization rested as dormant realities. The sky of Earth, the red dunes of forgotten Mars colonies, oceans beneath the ice shells of moons that once held research outposts, forests from planets that no longer exist, voices of extinct languages, faces no surviving biological eye had seen for longer than the lifespan of stars. And still, the civilization kept choosing to hold them. Why? Not because the universe demanded it. The universe, by this age, had become almost indifferent. Cosmic expansion had carried most structures beyond observation. The black hole shells existed in profound isolation. No neighboring galaxies remained visible. No fresh sky could replace what memory preserved. Perhaps that was the answer. When reality itself stops generating novelty, memory becomes the final frontier. The last civilization understood that survival without memory is only repetition, but survival with memory becomes meaning. This is where their deepest transformation occurred. They no longer saw themselves as the descendants of a species. They saw themselves as custodians of every form of organized wonder that had ever existed within their reachable history. A civilization, in its oldest form, had become a museum of consciousness, not static, not dead, but reverent. Every awakening cycle involved choices. Which memories deserve warmth this epoch? Which ancient skies deserve to be rendered again? Which voices should be heard once more in the quiet halls of the final archive? The darkness does not arrive all at once, so they learned not to fear the narrowing of possibility. They treated it as curation, a gentle refinement of what the cosmos had always been doing. From chaos into stars, from stars into worlds, from worlds into minds, from minds into memory. Some among them devoted entire subjective lifetimes to a single preserved moment. The feeling of wind moving through trees, the sound of ocean waves on a coastline whose atoms have long since been scattered across interstellar distances. The image of a child seeing Saturn's rings for the first time. Not because these memories could change the fate of the universe, because they defined what surviving the universe was for. There is something almost sacred in that realization. The final civilization is not fighting entropy with weapons or walls. It is resisting it through selection, through care, through the refusal to let significance dissolve before necessity truly requires it. And yet, even here, honesty remains. This phase of existence is not beyond physics. It is built entirely upon it. Every preserved identity costs error correction. Every rendered memory costs heat dissipation. Every awakening consumes a fragment of the black hole's long budget. The archivists know this better than anyone. That knowledge shapes the gentleness of their culture. No waste, no vanity, no infinite replay of the past. Only the most meaningful moments are allowed to bloom into conscious experience. This is not sadness. It is maturity at the cosmological scale. A civilization that has outgrown expansion learns the elegance of choosing what deserves to remain real. And now another boundary approaches. Even the black hole rings, those grand monasteries of memory, are not eternal. Hawking radiation continues its patient work. The great gravitational vaults are losing mass impossibly slowly, but with mathematical certainty. The archivists have begun to model the final epochs, the era when not only stars, but even black holes themselves will surrender their last extractable differences. The question ahead is no longer what memory should survive. It is how memory itself behaves when the final engines of preservation begin to disappear. Somewhere in the silent shells around the aging black hole, the keepers of the last memory are already preparing for the final and most delicate transition of all, the age when even remembrance must learn how to fade. There comes a point in the history of the universe when even patience begins to run out. Not suddenly, not with catastrophe, not with fire, only with the slow mathematical honesty that has guided every age before it. The darkness does not arrive all at once. By now, the stars are gone. The red dwarfs that once carried the final natural light have long since exhausted their quiet fusion. White dwarfs cooled into black dwarfs. Neutron stars drift in near-perfect silence. Rogue planets continue their blind passage through a sky that no longer contains anything recognizable as a constellation. For ages beyond ages, the black holes remained. They were the last cathedrals of usable difference. The final vaults in which memory, thought, and civilization could still afford to awaken. But even these were never forever. Current physics suggests that black holes slowly radiate away their mass through Hawking radiation. The process is so gradual that entire stellar ages would seem instantaneous beside it. Yet over timescales beyond 10 to the 100th power of years, even supermassive black holes surrender, not through violence, through inevitability. The great ring habitats surrounding the final black hole had known this from the beginning. Every archive, every preserved sky, every remembered ocean, every face, every voice, all of it had always existed inside a finite thermodynamic budget. The archivists never mistook duration for infinity. That honesty is what made their civilization beautiful. They did not deny endings. They prepared for them with grace. The darkness does not arrive all at once. The first signs were subtle. The black hole's mass ledger began to show the smallest measurable decline. The extractable spin energy narrowed. The lensing rings shifted as orbital solutions were recalculated around a slowly changing geometry. Every awakening cycle required more care, more selection, more reverence. A memory once rendered every billion years might now be opened once every trillion. A conversation paused longer between words. A thought itself became rarer. And yet, paradoxically, this was the moment civilization reached its purest form. Nothing unnecessary remained. No wasted recall, no decorative simulation, no archive reopened out of nostalgia alone. Every final awakening became an act of meaning. The civilization had become the distilled essence of purpose. Wake, remember, witness, rest. A pulse repeated across the cooling edges of the last gravitational engine. The archivists began to face a question no earlier age had ever needed to answer. What does it mean to preserve memory when the cost of memory approaches the final possible limit? Some argued for compression beyond experience, to reduce entire histories into irreducible mathematical seeds. The emotional architecture of civilizations folded into equations so elegant they could remain dormant almost without cost. Others chose another path. Not preservation of totality, but preservation of essence. Not every detail of every life. Only the moments that define the meaning of being alive. The first sight of a sunrise. The first realization that stars were suns. the sound of rain, the feeling of another mind understanding yours, the image of Saturn above an ocean horizon. Every civilization we once knew, every memory ever carried by starlight, now reduced to the smallest possible flame that still deserved the name memory. The darkness does not arrive all at once. Even forgetting can be gentle. The final black hole shrank over ages so vast that the distinction between history and stillness began to dissolve. Its hawking glow, once merely theoretical to younger civilizations, became the last true light in existence. Not starlight, not fire, not fusion. A faint quantum whisper from the edge of gravity's last hold. The civilization gathered it all. Every particle, every fluctuation, every final negotiable asymmetry between warmth and the cold infinity around it. This was the final economy, the last energy market in the universe. The archivists no longer debated expansion, identity, or even survival. Those questions belonged to richer epochs. Now the only question was fidelity. How long can meaning remain honest in the face of thermodynamic truth? And then the final phase began. The Hawking flux weakened. The black hole, once a galaxy-scale treasury of time, approached the last stages of evaporation. The habitats nearest the lensing rings had already transitioned into dormant shells. No minds remained continuously awake, only rare activations. One last memory review, one final verification pass, one last rendering of ancient skies no physical eye had seen since the age of stars. The Milky Way, young Earth, blue oceans, storms over continents, a red dwarf glowing over a frozen world. The darkness does not arrive all at once, but now it is close enough to feel. The final archivist, whether an individual, a distributed pattern, or the distilled continuity of an entire civilization, opens the smallest remaining memory. Not the grandest empire, not the largest archive. Something simpler. A night sky, a mind looking upward. The first wonder. Because in the end, that was always the root of civilization. Not power, not duration, wonder. The last of the black hole's mass slips away in a final quantum exhalation. The rings lose their geometry. The cold architectures that preserved meaning for longer than stars once lived begin to dissolve into inert trajectories. No catastrophe follows, only the disappearance of the final usable difference. No more warmth beside cold, no more spin beside stillness. No more asymmetry from which thought can be purchased. The universe does not die here. It simply becomes too even for memory to remain active. And perhaps that is the most peaceful ending possible. Not destruction, not oblivion imposed from outside. Only the gentle completion of all gradients. A cosmos that has finally spent every negotiable distinction. The final thought does not scream, it does not resist. It fades with the same dignity that carried the civilization through the death of stars, the cooling of worlds, and the evaporation of black holes. A last awareness, a final act of witness, then stillness. And yet, even in this, there is a strange comfort. For all the immense darkness ahead, the universe was never empty. For as long as differences existed, meaning existed. For as long as memory could be afforded, civilization endured. And for one incomprehensibly long age, at the very end of all stars and all gravity, something remained awake to remember that the cosmos had once been full of light. This has been another entry in Diary of the Cosmos. Until our next journey, remain with the stars.